sparkling water, please, and the fruit plate. If it's available." That was all she said, and she said it, the way she said everything, quietly, politely. The way a woman says something when she has long since learned that the world responds better to softness than to need. Dana Hartwell's face moved the way a face moves when it has been asked to do something beneath it. Not a flinch, not an eye roll, nothing so obvious as that. Just a slow, almost imperceptible tightening around the jaw. A flicker behind the eyes that lasted half a second and said everything that her mouth was too careful to say out loud. She let her gaze travel down from Naomi's face to her blazer, to her hands, to her tablet, and then back up again. And the whole journey took about 3 seconds, and at the end of it, Dana Hartwell had already decided everything she needed to decide. She didn't shout. She didn't make a scene, not yet. She leaned slightly forward over the service cart, and she lowered her voice to something that was meant only for the two of them. Something that the man in 1C would not quite catch, and the woman in 3B would not quite hear. And she said it slowly, savoring each word, the way someone savors something they have been wanting to say for a long time. She told Naomi that people like her should be grateful they were even on this plane. She said it like a reminder, like a piece of information Naomi had perhaps forgotten and needed to have returned to her. She said something about food stamps, something about special treatment, something about always wanting what didn't belong to them, and then she reached for the wine bottle that was sitting on the cart, a full bottle, dark red. 750 milliliters of burgundy-colored consequence, and she tilted it with a deliberateness that could not be mistaken for an accident, not even by someone trying very hard to mistake it. The wine hit Naomi's head first. It came down into her hair and ran along the part and poured down both sides of her forehead in dark red rivers, and it got into her eyes, and she had to close them, and it soaked through her hair and down the back of her neck and flooded the collar of her cream Armani blazer, the one that had been tailored specifically for her in Manhattan 3 weeks ago, and it ran down the front of her chest and soaked through to her skin and pooled in the leather seat beneath her and dripped from the armrest to the floor. 750 milliliters, every single drop. Dana set the empty bottle down on the service cart. She crossed her arms. The smirk that settled onto her face was not the smirk of someone who had made a mistake. It was the smirk of someone who had done exactly what they intended and was waiting to be congratulated for it. Around the cabin, the sounds came in waves. A gasp from the woman in row 5, a sharp intake of breath from the man across the aisle, someone near the back saying, "Oh my God," in a voice that was barely a voice at all. Phones came up. The little red recording lights blinked on one after another like runway lights coming to life in the dark. Nobody stood up. Nobody intervened. Nobody moved from their seat to help the woman sitting in row 2 who had wine dripping from her chin onto her ruined clothes. Naomi did not wipe her face. She did not reach for the napkins in the seat pocket. She did not speak, did not gasp, did not cry. She simply sat completely, absolutely still with her eyes open and her hands flat on her thighs, and the wine dripping from her jaw in steady, dark drops. And she looked at Dana Hartwell with an expression that was not anger and was not fear and was not defeat. And it was the stillness that made the cabin go quiet in a different way, a deeper way, the way a room goes quiet when something has just happened that cannot be undone. Dana had been so focused on Naomi's face that she had not looked at what was clipped to Naomi's blouse beneath the open flap of the ruined blazer. A badge laminated official, the kind of badge that belongs to someone with a corner office and a board seat and the direct phone number of people who could end careers with a single call. She had not looked at it. She had not thought to look. In 60 seconds, she would wish she had looked at nothing else. To understand what just happened, to understand how a Tuesday morning in a first-class cabin could arrive at that moment, at that wine, at that stillness, you have to go back 4 hours to the before, to the part of the day that still smelled like coffee and possibility. Dr. Naomi Caldwell woke at 4:47 in the morning in her Chicago apartment, which was not unusual because she almost always woke before her alarm and spent the first few minutes of each day lying in the dark, taking inventory of everything she needed to carry the board meeting in New York tomorrow morning. The acquisition documents that needed one final review, the dinner she had promised her husband she would not miss again, the recital, Lily's piano recital at 7 o'clock tonight that she had marked in 3 separate calendars and told her assistant to protect with her life. She was 43 years old. She had built Caldwell Biomedical Group from a single licensing agreement she had negotiated at 31, sitting across a table from 3 men who had not expected her to understand what she was reading, and she had understood every word of it, had in fact understood several things. They had not anticipated her understanding, and the look on their faces when she finished reading and set the document down and said, "I think we need to revisit Section 4, was a look she had carried with her ever since, not as a trophy, but as a reminder that the room is never as certain about you as it pretends to be. The apartment was quiet in the way that apartments are quiet at 4:47 in the morning, that particular suspended hush that belongs to the time before the city remembers itself. And from down the hall came the sound of Lily playing scales on the upright piano, the one they had moved into the guest room when Lily was 6, and announced that she was going to be a concert pianist, and Naomi had said, "Of course you are," without a single molecule of irony, because she had learned by then that the most expensive thing you could do for a child was doubt them. She dressed carefully the way she always dressed for days that mattered the cream. Armani blazer over a silk shell, her natural hair in a professional twist that had taken her 20 minutes and was worth every second of them, a pair of gold earrings that had been her grandmother's, a wedding ring that caught the light when she moved. On her left wrist, a watch. On her blouse, clipped just below the collar, a laminated badge that she wore every day without thinking about it, the same way she wore her name. Her tablet was already glowing on the kitchen counter when she came in for coffee, the acquisition documents for the $2.7 billion deal that would close Caldwell Biomedical's purchase of a smaller pharmaceutical firm, the kind of deal that took 2 years to structure and 20 minutes to mishandle. And the board meeting tomorrow morning was the last formal step before signing. She needed a clear head. She needed 4 hours in the air to work without interruption. She needed to land, get to the meeting, get through it, and then get to Lily's recital before the program started. Her husband called while she was loading her carry-on. His voice had that particular morning texture, slightly rough, warm, in a way that only happened before the day got its hands on him. And he said, "You promised about the recital," and she said, "Wild horses," which was their shorthand for "nothing on earth could stop me," and he said, "I'm going to hold you to that," and she said, "You always do," and there was a smile in both their voices that sat underneath the words like a second conversation happening just beneath the first one. At O'Hare, she moved through security with the ease of someone who has done this 300 times, shoes off, laptop out, boarding pass ready before the agent asked a nod to the TSA officer who recognized her from the Tuesday morning route. Her passport, sitting in the outer pocket of her briefcase, had stamps from 14 countries, evidence of pitches in Tokyo and partnerships in London and a conference in Nairobi that had changed the way she thought about pharmaceutical access in ways she was still working through 2 years later. She was tired in the good way, the way you're tired when you have been spending yourself on something that matters, and she told herself that this flight was just 4 hours. Just seat 2A and her tablet and the acquisition documents, and then home, and then Lily's recital, and then she could rest. On the jet bridge she paused for just a moment, the cold air coming through the seams. The sound of the ground crew below, the particular smell of an airport morning that is like no other smell in the world. And she exhaled and squared her shoulders and walked onto the plane without the faintest idea that the next 4 hours would cost her a blazer and earn her something she would spend years trying to put into words. Flight 2219 from Dallas to New York sat at gate C14 in the particular pre-departure stillness that first-class cabins have in the 20 minutes before pushback, the overhead bins clicking shut one by one, the smell of leather and chilled recycled air. Sunlight coming through the oval windows in long diagonal bars that moved slowly across the seats as the plane shifted on the tarmac, and the quiet percussion of 100 small preparations, seatbelts being drawn across laps, bags being tucked beneath seats, tablets being unlocked, earbuds being inserted with the practiced efficiency of people who have done this so many times that the ritual has become invisible. In seat 1, C, Harold Vance was reading a biography of Thurgood Marshall with the focused attention of a man who reads the way other men breathe automatically, continuously, without effort. And he had the look of someone who spent 40 years on the federal appellate bench, which was exactly what he had done. Silver-haired 68 with the kind of stillness that comes not from inaction, but from having learned over a very long time exactly when to speak and when to wait. He noticed things. He had always noticed things. It was what had made him good at his work and occasionally difficult to live with, according to his ex-wife, who said it with enough affection that it was clearly meant as a compliment. He noticed, for instance, the moment Naomi settled into 2A, the deliberate straightness of her spine, the way she arranged her materials with quiet efficiency, and he noticed separately the moment the platinum blonde flight attendant emerged from the galley and her eyes found the same seat. In seat 3, B. Maya Torres had 3 browser tabs open and a social media scheduling app running in the background, and her phone propped at an angle against her laptop screen that was either accidental or extremely deliberate, and anyone who had spent 5 minutes with Maya Torres would know it was never accidental. She was 31, a freelance journalist who had built a following of 2 million people by being in the right place at the right moment, and having the presence of mind to document what she found there. And she had a particular instinct for the energy of a room, the way a room shifts when something is about to happen. She felt it now in the way the air changed when the flight attendant with the platinum hair came out of the galley and did the thing with her eyes, and Maya's hand moved to her phone without her consciously deciding to move it. In seat 4, a doctor. Thomas Okafor was finishing a text message to his wife, a photo of the window seat captioned "Finally heading home," and he was smiling at her response, which was a string of emojis that their teenage daughters had taught her to use, and that she now deployed with great enthusiasm and approximate accuracy. And he was still smiling when he looked up and caught the tail end of the exchange between the lead flight attendant and the blonde one, and the smile faded, replaced by something quieter and more watchful. The expression of a man who has learned to read rooms the way you read an EKG, not by any single data point, but by the pattern, by the shape of the thing across time. Rebecca Lawson had been with Dallas Regional Airlines for 22 years, and she knew every variation of the face Dana Hartwell was making because she had been cataloging them for 3 of those years in a private notes app on her phone that she updated with dates and descriptions and the names of passengers involved, a record she had started keeping after the 4th formal complaint went nowhere. And she realized that her memory alone was not going to be enough. She was 51 with kind eyes that came from genuinely being kind, and not from practicing the expression. And she had the particular warmth of someone who actually likes people, actually finds them interesting. And her 22 years in the air had deepened that warmth rather than burning it out of her, which said something about her that was worth knowing. She saw Dana's face when Dana saw Naomi, and her stomach dropped in a way that was entirely familiar. She moved quickly, positioned herself between Dana and the first-class section, offered to handle rows 1 through 4, kept her voice easy and professional, the way you speak to a fire when you are trying to talk it into being something smaller. Dana said, "I've got it," in the tone she used when she had already decided, and Rebecca said she had already started. And Dana said, "I said I've got it," in a different tone. The one that came down from 6 months of seniority, like a hand on a shoulder, and Rebecca stepped back because the rules said she had to. She went to the galley. She pulled out her phone. She opened the notes app and typed the date, the flight number, and the time. She wrote, "She saw her. Same look." Starting to document. Then she put the phone in her pocket and stood in the galley doorway and watched, because watching was the only thing the rules had left her. Dana began her service rounds with the easy confidence of someone performing a role they have been performing so long that the performance has become indistinguishable from the self. She moved through the first-class cabin with a practiced smile and a tilted head, and a voice that was warm in exactly the way required, and she brought Harold his coffee the way he asked for it and offered the businessman in 1D a choice of orange juice or champagne, with the kind of attentiveness that made passengers feel seen, and she paused at Maya's row with a genuine-looking smile and asked if she needed anything before service began. She reached Naomi's row and stopped, said nothing, simply stood there for a long moment, long enough that the silence became a thing with shape and weight, and then she turned and served the passenger behind Naomi, and then the one across the aisle, and then she came back and stood in front of 2A again, as though she had genuinely not noticed, as though she were seeing Naomi for the first time. What? Not a question. A statement. Flat and cold and just barely on the permissible side of the line between rude and actionable, the kind of word that is technically a response without being one. Naomi asked in her usual way for sparkling water and the fruit plate if it was available. Her voice was the same voice she used in boardrooms and conference calls and depositions, precise, unhurried, giving nothing away. Dana looked into the cart. 3 San Pellegrino bottles sat in a bed of ice-green glass beaded with condensation, completely visible to anyone standing where Dana was standing, and to anyone sitting where Naomi was sitting. "We're out of sparkling," Dana said. "Tap water okay for you?" It was not a question either. Naomi's eyes moved from the bottles in the cart to Dana's face and back, and something moved across her expression. Not anger, not yet. Just the quiet recognition of someone who has been here before, who knows this particular geography, by feel who could walk it in the dark. And she said, "That's fine." Thank you, because she had learned long ago the difference between the battles worth fighting in the air and the ones worth documenting for later. Dana brought a plastic cup the smallest size filled halfway from the galley tap. No ice. The water was lukewarm and slightly cloudy. She walked it back and set it down hard on Naomi's tray table, and the impact sent a small wave over the rim that landed directly on the acquisition documents Naomi had spread beside her tablet, dark wet spots blooming on white paper ink beginning to separate and bleed at the edges. "Oops." Dana's voice contained exactly zero apology. "You should be more careful where you put things." She walked away, the service cart wheels squeaking against the aisle floor. Naomi sat very still for a moment and looked at the ruined documents. Then she reached into the seat pocket for napkins and began carefully, methodically dabbing at the wet spots, trying to save what she could. Harold leaned across the aisle and said in a voice that was quiet but not gentle, that what had just happened was completely unprofessional, and would she like him to say something? Naomi said, "It's okay, really, it's fine," in the tone that means it is absolutely not fine, and they both knew it, and Harold leaned back and opened his phone and began typing something. Rebecca appeared 2 minutes later with fresh napkins and a real glass of water with ice and a face that was carrying more than it should have had to carry. And she apologized in a low voice, once sincerely with her eyes, and Naomi thanked her. And they exchanged the briefest possible look that communicated without any words at all that they both understood what was happening and that it was not the first time it had happened in this cabin. An hour into the flight, Naomi stood to use the restroom. The seatbelt sign had been off for 40 minutes. She unbuckled, straightened her blazer, took one step into the aisle, and Dana materialized from the forward galley, as though she had been waiting, which she had been stepping directly into. Naomi's path close enough that Naomi could smell the floral perfume, something aggressively sweet. And Dana said, "Sit down," and Naomi said, "The seatbelt sign is off," and Dana said, I don't care what you think you see." And her voice had risen. Not shouted, but risen, the controlled escalation of someone who knows exactly how loud to get. And the words she said next, "Sit down, or I'll call the captain and report you," as a disruptive passenger landed in the cabin like something dropped from a height, because every black traveler in that cabin, and several who were not, knew what those two words could do, what they had done before, what they were designed to do. Naomi's pulse quickened. She felt it in her throat and at her wrists. She kept her face entirely still. Rebecca came rushing from the galley. "Karen, the sign is off, she's allowed," and Dana said, "Stay out of this," without looking at her eyes locked on Naomi. And the cabin had gone the way cabins go when something real is happening, that particular silence that is not silence at all, but the held breath of 40 people who are paying very close attention. Naomi made a calculation that took less than 3 seconds. She said, "I'll wait," softly without inflection, and sat back down and buckled her seatbelt and folded her hands in her lap. Dana's smirk returned. She walked back toward the galley with her shoulders squared, and behind her in 3B Maya's phone tilted a half-inch further on its prop against the laptop screen, finding a better angle, the red recording light steady and patient. Naomi opened her laptop. She started a new email. Subject line, "Incident Report. Flight 2219. She typed with the methodical care of someone who knows that words written in the moment of the thing are always more accurate than words written after, and she included time stamps and exact quotes and the seat numbers of everyone who had witnessed each moment. She did not send it. She saved it to drafts and closed the laptop and looked out the window at the clouds 35,000 feet below. And she thought about Lily's recital and about the acquisition document still slightly damp on her tray table, and she thought document remember wait. The first complaint Rebecca filed was dated 3 years, 2 months, and 11 days before this flight, and she could tell you that without looking it up because she had looked it up so many times that the date had become part of her internal calendar. The way certain birthdays do not. Because they bring joy, but because they mark something. It was a Haitian family, a father named Emmanuel, a mother named Marie Claire, and their 3 children, the youngest of whom was 4 years old and had fallen asleep against her father's arm before the flight reached cruising altitude. They were in first-class seats, 2A through 2C, and 3A upgrades earned through Emmanuel's platinum status, and they had asked Dana for their meal service with the particular combination of politeness and caution that people deploy when they know they are in a space that has not entirely decided to welcome them. Dana had told them the galley was out of their selections. She had said it with the practiced regret of someone performing regret, and then she had walked back to the forward galley and Rebecca had followed her, and Rebecca had seen with her own eyes 6 untouched meal trays sitting covered on the warming shelf, steam rising from the edges of the lids. Rebecca had brought the family their meals herself. She had apologized. She had made sure the 4-year-old got the children's option, even though it wasn't on the manifest. She had filed the complaint that evening, sitting in the crew lounge at JFK with her phone and her notes, and the particular exhaustion of someone who has done the right thing inside a system that is not designed to reward it. 6 weeks later, an email, 2 lines. Reviewed. No policy violation found. That was the first one. The second came 4 months later. An elderly black pastor named Reverend Clarence Booker, traveling alone from Dallas to Atlanta for his granddaughter's baptism, whom Dana had publicly accused in front of the entire cabin of presenting a fraudulent boarding pass, loudly enough that 2 passengers had taken out their phones before Rebecca intervened and confirmed that Reverend Booker's ticket was perfectly valid and had been for 3 weeks. Dana had been given a verbal reminder to verify before confronting. The reminder was not in writing. It did not appear in her file. By the time the 3rd complaint was filed, Rebecca had started the Notes app. She recorded dates, words, the names of passengers when she was able to get them. The response from HR each time under review. No action taken, insufficient evidence. Matter resolved internally. 14 times. The phrase "matter resolved internally" appeared 7 times, and each time Rebecca read it, she felt something harden slightly in a place that she did not want to become hard, but that was hardening anyway, the way things harden when they are repeatedly struck. She had stayed. She had a son in his second year of college and a daughter finishing high school, and a mother with a hip that needed replacing and a mortgage on the house she had bought when she was 34 and told herself she would pay off before she was 60. And Dana Hartwell had known in the way that people who wield institutional power over others always know that Rebecca's need for this job was a kind of leash. Not spoken, never spoken, just present, always in the background of every confrontation in the calculation. Rebecca ran every time she had to decide how far to push. She had not stopped pushing. 14 times she had pushed. And 14 times the system had absorbed the push and returned to its original shape, undented, unmoved as though no force had been applied at all. Now she stood in the galley doorway and watched Dana move toward the first-class cabin with the dessert cart. And she pulled out her phone and she opened the Notes app and she typed, Flight 2219. She's going back in. Lunch was worse. Multiple phones recording. This time feels different. She paused, then added, I hope I'm right. Then she put the phone away and followed Dana into the cabin, because the only thing worse than watching was not watching, and Rebecca Lawson had never been the kind of woman who looked away. Lunch service began 45 minutes into the flight with the particular choreography that first-class service requires: the warming of trays, the arrangement of glassware, the specific sequence of rows and preferences that a good flight attendant executes without thinking, because it has become as automatic as breathing. Rebecca reached for the service cart. Dana stepped in front of her, not roughly, not dramatically, just firmly, the way someone steps through a door they have decided they are going through, and said, This is my section, in a tone that closed the conversation before it began. Rebecca's jaw tightened. She stepped back. She went to the galley and stood there and watched through the doorway. Dana moved through first class with mechanical precision. Chicken or pasta, delivered with the kind of efficiency that passes for professionalism, served to Harold in 1C, and the businessman in 1D, and Maya in 3B, and Thomas in 4A, and every other passenger in the forward cabin with the practiced ease of someone who is very good at their job when they choose to be. She smiled. She refilled water glasses. She asked about dietary restrictions. She was for the length of the service run exactly the flight attendant she was supposed to be. She reached row 2. She did not stop. She moved the cart past Naomi's seat without pause, without a glance, without the slightest acknowledgement that anyone was sitting there, the way you move past a piece of furniture, the way you move past something that doesn't register as requiring attention. And she continued to the rows behind and served them. And then she returned to the galley with the cart and began stacking empty trays with a clatter that carried down the aisle. Naomi waited. 5 minutes. 10. She pressed the call button, the soft single ding that is designed to be unobtrusive, that carries just far enough to reach the galley and no further. Donna appeared with the expression already in place, the compressed lips, the lifted chin, the performance of someone who has been interrupted from something important. Yes, I didn't receive a meal. Naomi's voice was the same as it always was. Calm, exact, giving nothing away. We ran out. From where Naomi was sitting, she had a direct line of sight into the forward galley. She could see through the gap between the curtain and the wall, and she could see clearly 3 meal trays sitting covered on the warming shelf, steam wisping from under the lids completely untouched. She looked at them for a moment. Then she looked back at Dana. Then she looked at the trays again and said quietly, There are meals right there, and pointed. Dana's face did something then that went beyond the controlled performance she had been maintaining. Something harder surfaced, something with less calculation in it and more raw contempt, and she dropped her voice to the register she used, when she wanted to say something that she technically knew she should not say but intended to say anyway. "Those aren't for you," she said, and then lower still with the particular venom of someone who has been waiting for the moment to use it. "Maybe next time you can book a flight you can actually afford. Stop trying to sit where you don't belong." Harold Vance put down his biography of Thurgood Marshall. He stood up, all 6 feet of him. 68 years old federal appellate judge, for 4 decades a man whose voice had sent people to prison and freed others and shaped the law in ways that were still reverberating. And he said in a voice wrapped in velvet and filled with iron, "Excuse me, I'm a federal judge retired." That comment was completely inappropriate and discriminatory. Dana turned on him with the speed of someone who does not process the information before responding. "Sir, if you don't want to be removed from this aircraft, I suggest you mind your own business." Harold looked at her for a long moment. Threatening a federal judge, he said in exactly the same even tone as though he were observing something mildly interesting. Interesting choice. He sat back down and picked up his phone. In 3B, Maya's hand moved with the deliberateness of absolute certainty. She lifted her phone from where it was propped and angled it directly, no longer pretending it wasn't recording, and the red light was steady, and the angle was perfect, and she was already sending a backup to the cloud. Thomas in 4A had his phone out, openly camera facing forward, expression set. Rebecca came rushing down the aisle. "Dana, take your break." "I'll handle this section," and Dana said, "I don't need a break." And Rebecca said, "You're on multiple phones right now. Stop, now." And Dana looked around the cabin, found every face turned toward her, and 6 phones pointed in her direction, and instead of the retreat that any rational calculation would have produced, something shifted in her. Her chin came up, her shoulders squared, her eyes hardened, and she said, "Fine, record this," and turned back to Naomi's row. She reached into the galley and grabbed a meal tray, not one of the warm ones from the shelf. Something else. Something from further back. Something that had clearly been sitting since before this flight began, and she walked it to Naomi's seat and slammed it onto the tray table with enough force to crack the plastic lid, and the impact sent a spray of cold, congealed sauce across Naomi's tablet screen. The chicken beneath the lid was gray and shriveled and entirely wrong. The food of a different flight from a different day, served with the contempt of someone who has decided that the gesture matters more than the consequences. Rebecca stepped directly in front of Dana. "Crew rest area. Now." "That's an order." "Same rank," Dana said. "You can't order me anywhere." Rebecca's voice went very quiet. "Go, or I'm calling the captain." Dana left slowly with the particular deliberateness of someone who wants it understood that they are leaving by choice, and she did not look at Naomi as she passed, but the look she gave the general direction of row 2. The look aimed at nothing specific, and everything at once was the concentrated essence of everything she had been saying all morning, with her silence and her service cart and her plastic cups of tap water, and it landed on everyone who saw it like something physical. Dana Hartwell had grown up in Amarillo, Texas, in a neighborhood where the hierarchies were so embedded in the architecture of daily life that they had become invisible, not because they weren't there, but because they were everywhere, so constant that they read as natural as simply the way things were, the way gravity is simply the way things are. She had not had to think about who belonged where, because the answer was always already obvious, written into the landscape of her childhood in ways she had never been given the vocabulary to examine. She had wanted to be a flight attendant since she was 9 years old, since the first time she boarded a plane and saw a woman in a Navy uniform moving through the cabin with a kind of contained authority that seemed to a 9-year-old from Amarillo like the most sophisticated thing in the world. She had gotten the job at 25, had been good at it in the early years, had received commendations and passenger compliments, and the small validations that accumulate into a professional identity, and for the first 7 or 8 years, she had been by most measures genuinely good at what she did. The first time she was passed over for head purser, she was 36. She had more seniority than the woman who got the job by 2 years and 3 months. The woman who got it was Latina younger with stronger performance reviews and a passenger satisfaction rating 4 points above Dana's, and the logic of the decision was documented and clear, but Dana did not read it as logic. She read it as preference. She read it as the same word that had been living in the back of her mind for years, collecting other words around it, building a story that explained everything diversity. The word that meant in the story, she told herself, that someone had taken something that was rightfully hers and given it to someone else on the basis of something other than merit. The second time she was passed over, she was 39. The same story revised and extended. By then, the story had been running long enough to feel like history, to feel like documented fact, to feel like the only reasonable interpretation of everything that had happened and everything that hadn't. Now she stood in the back galley of Flight 2219 with her hands trembling slightly against the counter. Not from guilt, because what she felt was not guilt, was instead something she identified as injustice, as the particular burning injustice of a person who believes they are the one being wronged. And she heard Rebecca's voice in her memory saying, "You're on multiple phones. Stop now." And she felt what Rebecca's words had done to her, which was not what Rebecca had intended them to do. If it was already on camera, if it was already recorded, already backed up, already spreading, then the careful, calibrated approach that had served her for 13 years, the approach of doing just enough of stopping just short of the undeniable, was no longer available to her. The middle ground had collapsed. She was standing on one side or the other, and the only direction that felt like anything other than surrender was forward. She touched up her makeup in the small mirror inside the galley cabinet. She loaded the dessert cart with practiced efficiency, chocolate torte portions, the cheese plate, 3 red wine bottles, and 2 white. She told herself she was going back out to apologize, to de-escalate, to be professional. And she almost believed herself. And the almost was the distance between what she should have done and what she was about to do. Dana emerged from the galley with the dessert cart and the smile that didn't reach her eyes, and she moved through the cabin with the same mechanical precision as before. Harold declined dessert with a polite brevity that contained no warmth at all. Maya accepted coffee without taking her eyes off her phone or her hand off its recording angle. Thomas watched Dana move past his row with the stillness of someone who has made a decision about what they are going to do and is waiting for the right moment to do it. Dana reached Naomi's row. Naomi was working the tablet open, the screen glowing with financial projections, her stylus moving across the glass with the focused efficiency of someone trying to use the remaining flight time as productively as the morning had not allowed. She did not look up immediately. Dana's voice came out wrapped in a sweetness that was several degrees past convincing. The dessert selection, the wine list. Did she need anything? And Naomi looked up and saw the wine bottles on the cart and said in her usual tone that she didn't drink during work hours. Something in the phrase, the word work, the casualness of it, the implication that she had work hours worth mentioning seemed to snag on something in Dana, some exposed edge, and the smile thinned. Work hours. Dana set it back with a small, sharp laugh, the kind of laugh that is not a laugh at all. What work could you possibly be doing that matters? The cabin that had been murmuring went quiet. Naomi set her stylus down. She looked at Dana directly, and the look was patient in the way that has nothing to do with ease and everything to do with control. She said evenly that the comment was inappropriate. Dana leaned against the cart, a gesture of ease, of comfort, of someone who believes the space belongs to them, and she said, "Is it?" And then the words came, the ones she had apparently been carrying toward this moment all morning, the ones about how people like her always acted like they belonged, the pointed references to the blazer and the briefcase and the tablet, the insinuation wrapped around each object like a question. Are you sure this is really yours? Are you sure you've earned this? Are you sure you know where you are? Harold stood to his full height. He said his name and his title in a voice that filled the cabin the way a bell fills a room, and he told Dana that she needed to stop immediately. Everyone's somebody important these days, Dana said, and she almost managed to make it sound dismissive, except that her hands had found the wine bottle on the cart, not reaching for it, not lifting it, just resting against it. The way hands rest against things when the body is deciding something the mind hasn't caught up with yet. Maya was no longer pretending her phone was fully raised, both hands the angle deliberate and unwavering. Thomas had his out too openly without apology. The Korean woman in row 5 had stopped trying to look away. The black businessman in row 6 was on his feet. Naomi stood. Slowly, with the deliberateness of someone who has decided that sitting is no longer the right response, that the moment has changed into something that requires her to be vertical, and she said quietly without heat that she had paid for this seat, that she had every right to be here, that she was asking Dana once to step back and let her pass. Dana looked at the wine bottle. Her hand closed around the neck. The moment that followed happened slowly in the way that some moments do. The way the body registers danger before the mind catches up, the way the air changes before the weather does. And then Dana tilted the bottle, and the wine came out in a dark red stream and hit Naomi's head. And the sound it made against her hair was a sound that nobody in that cabin would forget. And it ran down her face and into her eyes and soaked her blazer and her blouse and the seat beneath her and the floor at her feet. And Dana held the bottle there until every last drop was gone, and then she set it down and crossed her arms. "Now you look like the mess you are," Dana said. "Remember where you belong. This is what happens when people forget their place." Naomi stood in the ruins of her appearance cream blazer, flooded burgundy natural hair soaked and dripping wine running off her chin in a steady dark stream, and she did not move. She did not wipe her face. She did not speak. She looked at Dana Hartwell with eyes that were completely entirely open, and the stillness of her was more devastating than any response she could have given, because the stillness said, "I am still here. I am still exactly who I was before this bottle. And you have just made the worst mistake of your professional life." The eruption came a half second after the bottle was set down. Not simultaneous, but close. The way thunder follows lightning by just enough time to know they are separate things. And it came from everywhere at once, voices overlapping and rising. "That's assault. Get the captain. Somebody do something," and 40 passengers in various stages of shock and outrage and the particular paralysis that comes from witnessing something you cannot believe you are witnessing. Dana stood her ground with her chin up and her arms crossed and her performance of certainty firmly in place, and she began the recalibration that people in her position always attempt. She was disruptive. I had to maintain order. This is a safety matter. But the words landed differently now in a cabin full of people who had been watching for the past hour and had the recordings to prove what they had seen, and the recalibration didn't take. Rebecca reached Naomi first, moving down the aisle with the focused urgency of someone who has been waiting to be able to act and is finally acting. She had white towels in both hands, and they turned pink the moment they touched Naomi's hair, and her voice was shaking with something that was rage and grief in equal parts, and she didn't try to hide either of them. She said, "Dana Hartwell, you are relieved of duty. Back galley. Do not speak to anyone. The captain has been notified, and police will meet this aircraft on landing. You can't fire me." Dana's voice had a waver in it now that hadn't been there before. "Same rank. You committed assault." Rebecca's voice did not waver at all. "Go." She deserved, "Get out of my cabin." Dana walked. She moved down the aisle, slowly making eye contact with passengers as she went, still looking for something, an ally, a nod, a face that would tell her she hadn't misjudged the room. And she found nothing, not one face that offered what she was looking for. Only phones and turned shoulders and a Korean woman in row 5 who was crying quietly and not trying to stop. Harold was on his phone, his voice low and measured, and absolutely unhurried, describing what he had just witnessed to someone who was clearly taking notes. Maya's phone was no longer just recording. She was typing with her other hand, the video already uploaded to 3 separate backup locations, already shared with 2 editors, the upload timestamp legally establishing when it was captured and where. Thomas had sent a text to his brother, who was an attorney, with the phrase, "You need to see this," and a link. Rebecca knelt beside Naomi's seat, her voice dropping to something more private. She apologized, not the reflexive apologize for the company apology, but a real one, the kind that costs something. And she said, "Dr. Caldwell," because she knew Naomi's name, had known it since she scanned the manifest at the gate, and had known more than the name, because she had seen Naomi's face in the business news, had recognized her the moment she boarded. "How did you know my name?" Naomi said. Rebecca told her, recognized her from the financial press from the board announcement 6 months ago. And then she said, still quietly, "She doesn't know. Dana never reads the company communications. She doesn't attend the all-staff meetings. She just shows up and does her version of the minimum." Naomi was silent for a moment. Wine dripped from her chin onto the ruined seat. "Don't tell her," she said. "Not yet. I want to see what the system does when it thinks it can protect her." Rebecca looked at her for a long moment, and then she nodded once with a heaviness that meant she understood exactly what Naomi was asking and why she was asking it, and she went to get fresh towels and a clean glass of water and another apology, and this one made 3, and none of them were enough, but all of them were meant. The captain's voice came over the intercom, controlled, professional, the voice of someone who is managing something and wants the passengers to know it's being managed, and he confirmed that a crew member had been removed from duty, and that law enforcement would be meeting the aircraft on landing, and that passengers should remain calm, and the cabin received this information with the particular quality of attention that people give to something they already knew was coming. 2 minutes later, the cockpit door opened. The co-pilot, a trim man with a careful expression, walked the length of first class and leaned down beside Naomi's seat and said something in a voice too low for anyone else to hear. And Naomi looked at him and nodded once, and he returned to the cockpit without looking at anyone else, and the cabin spent the rest of the descent asking each other in glances in raised eyebrows in the slight forward lean of bodies in adjacent seats. "Who is she? Why did he come out? What do they know that we don't?" In the back galley, Dana Hartwell was alone for the first time since the morning began, and the other crew members were finding reasons to be in the forward galley or in the aisle with service carts. And she stood against the wall with her phone in her hands, and she typed the name, Dr. Naomi Caldwell, into a search engine, and she waited for the results to load, and when they did, she read the first headline and then the second and then the third. And the phone slipped out of her hands and clattered against the galley floor, and she bent to pick it up with hands that had begun to shake in a way she could not control, and she stood back up and read the screen again and understood for the first time the full dimensions of what she had done. The remaining 40 minutes of the flight existed in a suspended state. The engine's hum unchanged, the altitude constant, the route unaltered by what had happened in the cabin, because the plane does not care about the human drama in its belly. The plane just flies. But the atmosphere inside was entirely different from the atmosphere of any ordinary descent, carrying the weight of what 40 people had witnessed and were still processing the particular heavy quiet of a space in which something irreversible has just occurred. Passengers who had been planning to sleep did not sleep. They sat with their phones and their thoughts and the low-grade discomfort of having watched something they could not unfeel. Some of them relieved they had recorded it, and some of them uncertain whether recording it had been right, and a few of them already replaying their own inaction with the critical clarity that hindsight provides at exactly the wrong moment. Maya was typing steadily the video already in 4 cloud locations. A caption drafted and revised and drafted again, held in the queue, waiting for the wheels to touch down and the cabin network to open fully. She had been a journalist long enough to know that the timing of a release matters almost as much as the content, and she was going to get this right. Thomas sat with his hands folded in his lap, and his phone face down on the tray table the way you put a phone face down when you have done what you needed to do with it, and now need to think. and he thought about the Haitian family Rebecca had mentioned during one of her quiet passes down the aisle, the one she had tried to describe in the terse shorthand of someone managing a professional situation, and he thought about his own daughters and the specific anxiety that came with loving children who would one day be adults in airports and boardrooms and first-class cabins. And he thought about what it was going to take. In the back galley, Dana had read the search results 7 times. Forbes, Dr. Naomi Caldwell, named CEO of Caldwell. Biomedical Group, Wall Street Journal. Caldwell, Biomedical, closes $2.7 billion acquisition. Fortune, the 50 most powerful women in business. Number 14. Dr. Naomi Caldwell. Business Insider, DHR. Holdings welcomes Dr. Naomi Caldwell to Board of Directors. There was a photograph on the Forbes page. Naomi in a boardroom blazer on expression steady, exactly the expression she had been wearing in seat 2A when Dana stood over her with a wine bottle. Dana's legs had gone unreliable. She was leaning against the wall now rather than standing one hand braced against the counter, and the story she had been telling herself about who Naomi was, the story that had justified every decision she had made since the boarding began, was disintegrating in real time. Not because the facts had changed, but because the facts she had chosen to see had always been only a fraction of the facts that were there, and the rest of them were loading on her phone screen one headline at a time. She thought about apologizing. She calculated what an apology would and would not do, and the calculation was bleak in every direction, and she stood in the galley, and the plane descended, and the lights of New York grew in the oval windows, and she had no move left. That wasn't a loss. Naomi in seat 2A was not thinking about Dana. She was looking out the window at the way New York presents itself from altitude, the grid of lights, the rivers dark between the boroughs, the particular density of a city that is always happening, always occurring, always in the middle of itself. And she was thinking about Lily's recital, about whether the town car driver could make it to the Upper West Side by 7 if they left JFK by 5:30, about whether the wine in her hair would wash out or whether the blazer was simply gone. Which it was. She knew it was gone. The cream was burgundy now and would stay that way. She opened her drafts folder. She looked at the 2 emails, the one to the DHR Holdings board, the one to her attorney Patricia. She attached the video Maya had airdropped to her phone at 37,000 feet, the one already time-stamped and cloud-backed in 4 locations. She attached Harold's written statement already typed, and sent to her phone in the precise, legalistic prose of a man who spent 40 years building sentences that would hold up to scrutiny. She read both emails once. They were correct. They were complete. Her finger hovered over the send button for the first email, and then she pressed it, and then the second, and the 2 soft whooshes of the outbox were the quietest, most consequential sounds of the day. She put the phone in her pocket. She looked out the window again. The plane banked slightly over Jamaica Bay, and the runway lights came into view below 2 straight lines of white converging at the horizon, and she thought, just get to the recital. Whatever comes after this, just get to the recital. The wheels hit the tarmac at JFK with the particular jolt of an aircraft reclaiming its relationship with gravity, the engines reversing with a sound that pressed through the fuselage and into every seat, and for a moment the cabin was nothing but the physics of deceleration, the slight forward press of momentum. The settling, the slowing, and then the engines eased, and the world outside the windows became the ordinary world of an airport tarmac runways and service vehicles and the distant geometries of terminal buildings. Except that along the right side of the plane, through the oval windows, the lights were flashing. Blue and white in the particular rhythm that belongs to law enforcement, and beneath the lights were vehicles, 3 police SUVs and 2 airport security trucks, parked in a deliberate formation that was not the formation of people who happened to be in the area. The captain's voice came through the speakers with a finality that required no interpretation. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated. Do not stand. Do not retrieve your luggage from the overhead bins. Law enforcement will be boarding this aircraft. Please remain in your seats until you are instructed otherwise." A pause, and then, "We apologize for any inconvenience." The cabin absorbed this in silence. Nobody moved. The plane taxied to the gate and stopped, and the jetway extended with its familiar mechanical groan, and the forward door opened with the pneumatic hiss that usually means you may now begin the complicated choreography of deplaning, but tonight it meant something else entirely, and the 4 people who came through it wore Port Authority uniforms and had body cameras activated at the chest, and moved with the measured efficiency of people who have been briefed and know exactly what they are here to do. The lead officer was a black woman, tall, composed with the particular quality of stillness that belongs to someone who has walked into difficult rooms before and learned that stillness is its own kind of authority. Her name tag read, Officer Diana Webb. She scanned the cabin from the doorway once thoroughly the way you scan a room when you have been given a description and are confirming it against reality, and her eyes found seat 2A, and she walked directly there without looking at anything else. Dr. Caldwell. Not a question. A confirmation. Naomi looked up. Wine, dried burgundy in her hair, blazer, destroyed expression, composed. Are you injured? Do you need medical attention? I'm fine, Naomi said. Thank you, officer. Officer Webb nodded once the acknowledgement of a professional accepting a professional's assessment and turned to her team. 2 officers moved toward the back of the plane. The cabin tracked them with 40 pairs of eyes, the silence complete. In the back galley, Dana heard the footsteps and knew before the officers appeared what the footsteps meant, and she tried. Her voice came out small and wrong and pleading. She tried to explain that there had been a misunderstanding, that she could clarify everything, that if they would just let her speak. And the male officer's voice was flat and professional and entirely without inflection as he told her that she was being detained for assault, and he read her the rights she had heard on television 1,000 times. But that landed completely differently when they were being read to you in a galley that smelled like coffee and jet fuel, with the body camera light blinking steadily at chest height. The handcuffs made a sound. The metallic double click of the mechanism engaging each wrist one after the other, and it echoed in the narrow galley and carried into the aisle where passengers sat in silence, and heard it with the particular quality of attention that belongs to moments people know they will remember. Dana was brought forward through the cabin, and the walk was its own thing, its own prolonged reckoning past Harold, who did not look up from his phone, past Maya, whose camera tracked her without apology, past Thomas, whose expression was not triumph, but something quieter and harder, past the Korean woman in row 5, who had stopped crying and was now watching with dry eyes and an expression of absolute attention. The procession reached row 2. Officer Webb paused. Dr. Caldwell, she said, we understand you are a board member of this airline's parent company. Naomi stood. She did it slowly with full deliberateness, and she reached up with both hands and unbuttoned the front of her blazer and let it fall open, and there, clipped to the silk shell beneath laminated official, the kind of badge that belongs to a corner office and a board seat and a net worth that appears in financial publications, was the badge. Caldwell, Biomedical Group. Dr. Naomi Caldwell, Chief Executive Officer. D.H.R. Holdings Board Member. The cabin light caught the laminate, and the badge gleamed, and the cabin saw it, and Dana saw it, and Dana's knees went, and the officers held her upright, and for a long moment the only sound in the entire aircraft was the air conditioning, steady and indifferent, and keeping its own counsel. Dana's face went through several things in rapid succession. The drain of color, the working of the jaw, the specific collapse of an expression that has been held in place by certainty and is now being held in place by nothing at all. And then she said the thing that she said, which was the thing that revealed more than any of her actions had what she had actually believed when she tilted that bottle. "I didn't know," she said. Her voice had lost its edge entirely. What was left was smaller, younger, stripped of its architecture. "You should have said something. Told me who you were." The cabin heard this. Every person on the aircraft heard it, and the hearing of it was its own event, its own answer to a question that had been sitting in the air since the boarding began. And the answer was, this was always about who you are. You just didn't expect who you are to have consequences. Naomi took one step toward her. One step measured deliberate close enough that Dana could still smell the wine they were both wearing, and she said what she said in a voice that was quiet but that had the particular quality of something said with complete composure by someone who has been composing themselves for hours. "I shouldn't have to prove my worth to be treated with basic human dignity." Dana opened her mouth, closed it. Nothing came. Naomi continued still, the same quiet voice, still the same steadiness without heat, without anger. Just the plain weight of it. "You told me I needed to learn my place. I never forgot my place, Dana. My place is wherever I choose to be. The question is whether you know yours now." Dana had no answer. What she had was tears. They came all at once, the mascara moving in dark lines down her face, and she was still in handcuffs, and the sound the cuffs made when her hands trembled was a small, rattling sound that was worse than silence, and she said, "Please, I have kids. I need this job. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry," in a voice that had come completely undone. Naomi looked at her for a moment, not with cruelty, not with satisfaction, but with a finality that was its own kind of mercy. The mercy of the thing being over, the mercy of not having to carry it any further. Officer Webb touched Dana's arm. "Let's go." Donna was turned toward the exit and walked forward, and she looked back, once turned her head over her shoulder with the last-second desperation of someone who is not ready for the door to close, and Naomi's eyes were steady and unwavering, and held no forgiveness and no malice. Only the absolute certainty of someone who knows exactly who they are. The forward door received Dana Hartwell and the two officers, and the door closed, and the cabin erupted. It was thunderous 40 people on their feet, applause that had been held for the entire flight finally released all at once, the sound of it filling the narrow space and pressing against the walls, and Harold was clapping with both hands, and the force of a man who has been exercising restraint for 3 hours and is now done exercising it. And Maya was crying and clapping at the same time with a lack of self-consciousness that was genuinely beautiful, and Thomas had his fist in the air, and the Korean woman in row 5 was smiling for the first time. Naomi did not smile. She stood in her wine-soaked seat with her blazer open and the badge visible, and she looked at the people around her and nodded once, weary the nod of someone who has done a hard thing, and knows that doing the hard thing does not make you feel light. It makes you feel the weight of it more clearly, and she sat back down. Rebecca appeared, a clean airline shirt in her hands, an expression on her face that had moved past professional composure into something real, and she said, "Thank you for not just walking away, for making them see." And Naomi touched her arm and said, "You tried to stop her, Rebecca. 14 times. That matters more than you know." Rebecca's eyes filled. She started to say something and then stopped because there wasn't a version of what she wanted to say that didn't feel insufficient, and she nodded and went to get fresh towels. Officer Webb returned without Dana. She took Naomi's formal statement with a thoroughness and a respect that felt, after the preceding 3 hours, almost disorienting in its simplicity. "You were here. This happened. We have it documented. Here is what comes next." Harold volunteered his complete testimony without being asked, in the precise, measured sentences of a man who has spent his life understanding what testimony requires. Maya confirmed that the video was time-stamped and backed up in 4 locations, and available to the DA immediately. Thomas produced a business card and his brother's number. A young black woman in row 826, maybe 27, with the kind of face that has been trying not to show what it's feeling for several hours and has not entirely succeeded, leaned forward as Naomi gathered her things and said, just barely above a whisper, "Thank you. Thank you so much." Naomi paused, looked at her directly. "What's your name, Crystal? Never let anyone make you feel like you don't belong, Crystal. You hear me?" Crystal nodded, and the tears that had been waiting finally came, and Naomi moved down the aisle toward the door, and the passengers she passed were standing, not applauding now, just standing. The way you stand when something has occurred that requires you to be on your feet, the quiet reverence of bearing witness, and she walked through the door into the jet bridge and the cold air and the ordinary world waiting to receive her. She pressed send on the emails, the two she had drafted to the DHR Holdings Board and to Patricia, her attorney, both complete, both evidenced, both delivered with the soft double whoosh of the outbox, and she stood in the jet bridge for a moment with the cold air on her face and the sound of the airport coming through the walls around her, and she thought, it's done. That part is done. The terminal at JFK received her the way terminals receive everyone, with the indifferent noise and movement of a place that is always in the middle of something else. And a black town car sat at the curb with the engine running, and she slid into the back seat, and the leather was cool against her wine-soaked clothes, and the door closed. And for the first time since she had boarded, there was nothing between her and the full weight of what had happened. Her phone had 58 unread emails. She scrolled to the first reply from Robert Ashby, CEO of DHR Holdings, subject line, "Urgent, Flight 2219, Dr. Caldwell." And she read it in full, horrified, devastated, full cooperation with law enforcement investigation launched immediately, every resource at the company's disposal, zero tolerance, this ends today. She put the phone face down on the seat, not because she did not believe him, but because the email was the first step of a long road that she did not have the energy to stand at the beginning of tonight. Tonight there was the recital. Tonight there was Lily at the piano, and she was going to make it. She had checked with the driver, and they were going to make it. And that mattered. That mattered in a way that was entirely separate from everything else. Simultaneously, in an airport processing room 3 terminals away, Dana Hartwell sat on a concrete bench in a paper jumpsuit and understood for the first time the full shape of the afternoon. Her phone had been confiscated, but she had seen enough before they took it. Her name on every news site, her face in thumbnail after thumbnail, the phrase 13 years of complaints appearing in articles alongside her uniform photo, the audit trail of 14 ignored reports becoming public knowledge in real time. Her husband had been called. His first words were not, "Are you okay?" They were, "What did you do?" He worked in insurance, and he knew what exposure looked like, and he understood immediately that this was the kind of exposure that does not recover from, and he did not come to the processing center. Dana sat on the bench alone. The concrete was cold. The room smelled like disinfectant, and something underneath disinfectant that was harder to name. 12 hours ago, she had been untouchable. 14 complaints. Nothing ever happened. The system absorbed and processed and returned her each time to the same position, same rank, same cabin, same route. And now the system that had protected her was the evidence against her. And the 14 complaints were not dismissed anymore. They were a documented pattern, and the pattern was in the hands of people who were going to use it. The town car crossed the Kosciuszko Bridge with the East River below it and the city's light on the water, and Naomi watched through the window and let herself feel it. Not the triumph which she didn't feel, and not the satisfaction which was more complicated than satisfaction, but the weight of what it had required to sit in that seat and be still, to document and wait to not reveal the badge when revealing it would have been easier to let the thing fully happen, because the full happening was the only way the full truth would be visible. and the full truth was the only thing that was going to do what needed to be done. She thought about every other person who had sat in that seat, in that cabin, on that airline. Every person who had received the tap water and the skipped meal service and the bathroom denial and the sideways look, and who had not had a badge to reveal, and who had gone home with their humiliation and their incident report that would go unreviewed, and who had perhaps told the story to someone who believed them, and perhaps told it to someone who didn't, and who had ultimately filed it somewhere in the interior where you file the things that happen to you that the world declines to care about. For them, she thought. That's why you waited. That's why you let it all happen. Not for the badge. For everyone who never had one. Her phone buzzed Lily texting a piano emoji and a clock emoji and a question mark. Naomi typed back, "On my way." Wild horses. Lily sent back a string of musical notes and a heart. And Naomi smiled. Actually smiled for the first time since Dallas, and watched the city go by outside the window, ordinary and indifferent and full of people who had no idea what had happened in a first-class cabin 30,000 feet above them today, and who would know by morning. The external audit firm arrived at Dallas Regional Airlines headquarters 48 hours after the landing. 6 investigators with laptops and a mandate from DHR Holdings that gave them access to everything. Every file, every complaint log, every HR correspondence, every piece of documentation that had passed through the company's systems in the past 5 years. And they worked with the particular efficiency of people who have been given no reason to be gentle and every reason to be thorough. Rebecca met with them for 4.5 hours. She brought her notes app, 3 years of entries dated timed specific, and she brought printed copies of all 14 formal complaints, and she brought the names of the passengers she had been able to track down, and she sat across from the lead auditor and described each incident with the precision of someone who recorded things exactly as they happened, because she had always suspected the day would come when exactly as they happened would matter. What the auditors found once they had access to the full system was that Dana's file contained not 14 complaints, but 45. 31 additional reports had been filed by other crew members and 2 gate agents over the course of Dana's 13-year tenure, all categorized as unresolved, all involving passengers of color. Black passengers, Latino passengers, South Asian passengers, Middle Eastern passengers, and not a single substantiated complaint from a white passenger in 13 years of documented interactions. The statistical pattern was noted in the audit report in a single sentence that was written in the dry, precise language of institutional documentation, and was somehow, because of that precision, more devastating than any charged language could have been. The VP of Human Resources was placed on administrative leave within 72 hours of the audit beginning. 2 regional managers submitted resignations before they could be formally interviewed. Dana's termination had already been issued, delivered by courier to the processing facility while she was still in intake, a letter she read 3 times because the words felt too large to absorb. 13 years ended in 2 paragraphs on official letterhead. The criminal charges assembled quickly because the evidence assembled quickly. Maya's video from 6 angles of phone footage and cabin security recording Harold's written testimony carrying the unimpeachable weight of 40 years on the federal bench, Rebecca's 3-year documentation standing as proof of pattern rather than incident. The Manhattan DA received the case and looked at what was in front of her and did not hesitate. Assault, federal hate crime enhancement, interfering with flight crew duties. The grand jury would hear it within the month. Outside the legal process, the morning after the flight brought something else entirely. Maya's video released at 6 a.m. Eastern Time with a caption that simply described what had happened and where and to whom reached 5 million views by noon and 19 million by midnight. And the number was still climbing because the video had the particular quality of evidence that speaks for itself, that requires no editorial framing, that says everything it needs to say in its own running time. The hashtag moved across platforms in waves. Dana's name appeared in the first hour. The 14 ignored complaints appeared in the second. Someone found her personnel file through a source inside the airline. Someone else found her social media history, years of posts about standards and fairness, and the particular kind of coded language that becomes in context its own kind of confession. Naomi's statement, 2 sentences released through her company's communications team, said only, "What happened to me happens to travelers every day. The difference is that most people facing what I faced have no platform and no badge, and that is exactly what must change." She gave no interviews. She let the video and the testimony and the audit do what they were designed to do, which was tell the truth in a form that could not be revised or softened or managed into something smaller than it was. By the end of the week, Robert Ashby had held a press conference at DHR Holdings headquarters, flanked by the company's legal team and its new head of inclusion, a position that had been created specifically in the aftermath, and announced a full restructuring of the complaint and reporting process, mandatory retraining for all customer-facing staff, and the creation of an independent passenger advocacy office that would operate outside the normal chain of command, reporting directly to the board. He credited the investigation, the audit, and the video. He did not say Dana's name. He said Naomi's name twice, and each time he said it there was something in his voice that was not quite contrition, but was close to it. The sound of someone who understands that sorry is a beginning, not a resolution. The grand jury proceedings were held in Manhattan, in a room that was smaller than the gravity of its contents, and Rebecca Lawson was on the stand for 2 hours and 40 minutes. She described every incident she had witnessed and every complaint she had filed with the same unhurried precision she had brought to the audit meeting, and the room received each one in a silence that accumulated differently from ordinary silence. Heavier, more textured, the silence of people who are counting, who are keeping track, who are arriving at a number that they did not expect to arrive at and cannot look away from. The moment that broke the room, that changed the quality of the silence from attentive to something else, something that had grief in it, was when she described the Haitian family. She had mentioned it before to the auditors in brief professional shorthand, but here she was given time and she used it. Emmanuel and Marie-Claire and their 3 children, the youngest 4 years old and asleep against her father's arm before cruising altitude, and Dana claiming the galley was out of their selections, and Rebecca walking to the galley and finding 6 covered trays on the warming shelf, steam still rising completely untouched. She brought the family their meals herself. She filed the complaint that evening. 6 weeks later, reviewed, no policy violation found. When she said those words, the 2-line email word for word from memory, the prosecutor did not interject. The room held the silence for several seconds, and nobody hurried it. She was asked towards the end of her testimony whether she felt guilt for having stayed, for having continued to file complaints that went nowhere, for not having escalated further or gone outside the company's channels. She said that she felt responsibility, which was different from guilt. And she explained the difference with a clarity that made the distinction feel not like a defense, but like a genuine reckoning. Guilt implies a wrong action. Responsibility means understanding what you must do now with what you could not do before. I thought if I stayed, if I kept documenting the weight of it, would eventually have to matter to someone, she said. I was wrong about that. The weight didn't matter until it was impossible to ignore. And it became impossible to ignore because Dr. Caldwell had the standing to make it so, and because she chose to use that standing for something larger than herself. The prosecutor said nothing for a moment. Then she nodded and moved to the next question. After her testimony, Rebecca took the elevator down to the lobby and stood outside the courthouse in the November air and called her mother. Her mother asked how it went, and Rebecca said, "I think it's finally going to matter." And her mother said it already mattered. "Baby, it mattered every time you filed one of those reports, even when nobody listened," and Rebecca stood on the courthouse steps with the phone against her ear and let that land. And after a moment she said, Yeah, yeah, I think you're right. Then she went back inside to wait for the proceedings to finish. 3 months after the flight, Manhattan Criminal Court convened the case, and Judge Patricia Osei presided from the bench with the particular attention of a judge who has read every document and intends to have understood every document before a word of testimony is spoken. The courtroom was full press in the designated area, the public gallery at capacity, a quality of attention in the room that made the air feel different. The way air feels different when everyone in a space is focused on the same thing. Dana arrived in modest clothes with her hair down, her attorney having coached her on the presentation of a person rather than a persona, and she sat at the defense table and looked smaller than she had looked in that first-class cabin, which was the point, and which did not work the way her attorney hoped it would work, because the evidence was not in the business of being moved by presentation. Day 1. Maya's video on the courtroom screens played at full size, in the particular silence that courtrooms produce when what is being shown requires no commentary. Dana's voice filled the room. "Now you look like the mess you are." And Naomi's stillness filled the room, and the wine filled the room, and 2 jurors turned slightly away from the screen, and then turned back because looking away was not an option they had committed to. Dana sat at the defense table and looked at the table. Harold Vance testified on day 2, 68 years old, 4 decades on the federal appellate bench, a man whose credibility existed in a category that did not require establishment because it was itself a kind of institution. He described what he had witnessed with the measured spare precision of someone who has spent his life understanding exactly which words do the work and which ones get in the way. "I have never in 40 years on the bench witnessed discrimination this deliberate or this public," he said. She did not simply assault Dr. Caldwell. She assaulted her right to exist in that space. The defense cross-examined without gaining ground. Day 3 brought Rebecca 2.5 hours on the stand, the same testimony she had given the grand jury, but with the accumulated weight of the trial behind it, and the 45 complaints read into the record one by one with the names and dates and descriptions, and the reading took 37 minutes, and the courtroom sat through every minute of it. Day 4. Naomi. Navy suit, gold earrings, the quiet authority of someone who does not need the room to believe her because the room already has the video and the testimony and the audit report and the pattern spread across 45 complaints over 13 years. She walked through every detail of the flight, the water, the bathroom, the meal, the wine in the same unhurried, exact voice she used in boardrooms and depositions, and when the cross-examination asked why she had not identified herself sooner, why she had allowed the situation to escalate rather than simply producing her credentials, her answer was immediate and level. "Because my humanity should have been enough." The judge allowed the brief eruption of response in the gallery to settle at its own pace before continuing. The jury deliberated for 1 hour and 53 minutes. The forewoman stood and read the verdicts in the same order they had been presented: guilty, guilty, guilty. Dana closed her eyes. Her attorney put a hand on her arm, and Dana did not move. Judge Osei addressed Dana at sentencing with the careful thoroughness of a judge who intends every word to be part of the record and part of the reckoning. She noted the pattern: 45 documented incidents. 13 years the institutional failure that ran parallel to the individual failure, the way authority can become a vehicle for harm when the systems designed to check it decline to do their job. The sentence: 20 months, 3 years probation, $280,000 in restitution, mandatory counseling, permanent bar from any customer service role. "You held authority and trust," Judge Osei said, "and you converted them repeatedly and deliberately into instruments of harm. This sentence reflects what that costs." Dana was led from the courtroom. She did not look back. DHR Holdings settled the civil lawsuit for $9. $1 million full admission of institutional failure. No contest. and every dollar went where Naomi directed it, a third to an anti-discrimination training fund for aviation staff, a third to a legal defense fund for passengers who face discrimination and cannot afford to fight it, and a third to a scholarship program for young people of color pursuing aviation careers. Because she sat on the board, she could watch the implementation rather than simply announce it, and she did watch it, quarterly reviews, measurable benchmarks, no press releases until there were results to report. Rebecca Lawson was promoted to Director of Cabin Services and Inclusion, the first black woman to hold the role in the airline's history, and she built the new complaint system from scratch, the one that could not be buried, that reported independently, that treated a filed report as the beginning of a process rather than the end of one. The VP of Human Resources, who had managed the disappearing act on 45 complaints, never worked in aviation again. 3 other major carriers announced voluntary internal audits within 60 days of the settlement, and none of them did it voluntarily. They did it because the alternative had just become visible, and visible meant expensive. The changes were real. They were not complete. They were a beginning of the kind that has to be watched and tended and held to, and Naomi intended to do all 3. 6 months later, Naomi booked Flight 2219 again. Same route, same seat. She needed to know it was just a seat again, that she could sit in it without the weight of that afternoon pressing on her from all sides, and the only way to know was to go. The boarding experience was different in ways that registered in the body. Before the brain caught up with them, the crew was younger and more varied, moving through the cabin with a warmth that came from actually being present rather than performing presence. And the cabin itself felt lighter, not physically, but in the way rooms feel lighter, when the atmosphere has changed, when the people in them are operating from a different set of assumptions about who belongs there and what they deserve. Rebecca was at the door. She had been there since the morning she said, wanting to be the one to greet this particular flight. They shook hands, and the handshake lasted a moment longer than handshakes usually do, and they looked at each other with the full recognition of people who went through something together and came out changed by it, and nothing that needed to be said between them required words. Naomi settled into 2A, cream blazer. Deliberate choice. She had bought another one. Same style, same color, because she refused to have the color mean something it shouldn't mean. She put her tablet on the tray table and looked out the window and felt the ordinary miracle of a morning flight that was just a morning flight, a seat that was just a seat, a cabin that smelled like coffee and was exactly as loud as it should be and required nothing from her except to sit in it. A young flight attendant appeared at her row 24, maybe 25. Uniform, crisp hands, slightly trembling with the particular nervousness of someone who has something to say and is working up to saying it. And she stopped and took a breath, and she said, "Dr. Caldwell, I'm sorry to bother you. I wanted to say thank you." Naomi waited. The young woman explained she had grown up in Memphis in a family where flying was something other people did, and she had wanted to be a pilot since she was 7 years old, since the first time she looked up at a plane crossing the sky above her neighborhood and understood in the wordless way that 7-year-olds understand things, that she wanted to be the one in control of something like that. But pilot training cost money her family didn't have, and the scholarship programs she found were competitive in ways that felt impossible, and she had almost stopped believing it was going to happen. And then the Caldwell Aviation Scholarship had opened, and she had applied, and she had been accepted, and she started pilot training next month. Her name was Jasmine Cooper. Naomi listened to all of it without interrupting, the way you listen to something important. And when Jasmine finished, there was a silence between them that was not uncomfortable, that had the quality of something settling into its right place. "The sky has always belonged to you, Jasmine," Naomi said. "Don't let anyone tell you differently." Jasmine wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and smiled and moved on to the next row, and Naomi turned to the window and watched the ground crew go about their ordinary work in the ordinary morning light. And she let herself feel the full weight of what the past 6 months had been the trial, The audit, the civil case, the scholarship fund meetings, and the board sessions, and the calls with Patricia, and the interviews she declined, and the ones she gave. And underneath all of it, steady as a foundation, the thought that had been there since the moment the wine hit her face: this is bigger than you. Do not make it smaller. She thought about Dana, not with anger, not with the weight of carrying something because she had set that down somewhere between the courthouse steps and this morning, but with the flat, finished quality of a chapter that is over. Donna had served 14 months and was working somewhere outside aviation, and the court-ordered therapy was ongoing, and whatever Dana's life was now was its own separate story, no longer Naomi's to tell or carry. She thought about Crystal in row 8, who had sent a 3-page handwritten letter that arrived on a Tuesday and that Naomi had read standing at her kitchen counter, and then sat down and not moved for several minutes, because the letter said things that deserved to be stood still for. She thought about the Haitian family from Rebecca's testimony, Emmanuel and Marie Claire, and their 3 children, and she hoped with a specific directed hope that they had somehow learned that the complaint Rebecca filed had finally mattered, that the 3-hour hunger had not been the end of the story. The plane pushed back from the gate. The engines came to life. Outside the windows, the tarmac moved past, and then the runway, and then the long acceleration, and then the particular moment, the moment Naomi had always loved, that she would always love, when the wheels leave the ground and the weight of everything releases just for a second into the air. She looked out at the clouds rising to meet the windows. She looked at the badge on her blazer clipped openly now, not hidden, not a weapon, not a credential being held in reserve for the right moment, just part of who she was. Ordinary, unremarkable, exactly where it had always been and always deserved to be. She closed her eyes. The engines carried her home. If this story moved you, please share it. Someone out there needs to hear it, someone who has been told they don't belong somewhere they have every right to be. And subscribe to our channel, because the next story we tell might be the one that changes everything.